Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Stream Management Plan 101 workshop. We're so glad to have you here with us today. Before we get started, just a couple of Zoom logistics. If you want to go ahead and make sure that you are muted, and feel free to leave your video on if you would like. Otherwise, you can turn it off, and you're going to find those two controls on the bottom left toolbar. We'll also be using the chat function quite a bit today during our workshop, and you can find the chat box there. To get to it is in the center of your toolbar. And then we also ask if you can please change your Zoom name to your first and last name. And you're going to be able to do this by hovering your mouse over your square, and you'll see three little dots appear in the upper right-hand corner. If you click those, you should have the option to rename. So if you want to just add your first and last name there, that would be great. Just an overview of our agenda today. We'll do some introductions and then introduce the SMP team. We'll then get into the history of stream management plans. We'll watch a video from the San Miguel Stream Management Plan. Then we'll dive deep into the nuts and bolts. Then we'll watch two more videos, one from South Boulder Creek and then another one from Middle Colorado to learn more about their approaches for their stream management plans. We'll then discuss resources and funding and then get into some Q&As. So if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat box, and again, you'll be able to have access to that in the bottom middle part of your toolbar. So in the chat box, if you can add your name, your organization, which river basin you're calling in from. And then also here at River Network, it is our practice to do land acknowledgements. So I'm calling in from Denver, Colorado, and that is the traditional lands of the Ute and the Arapaho tribes. So if you'd like to add that in, you certainly can. I'd like to introduce our Stream Management Plan team. There's quite a few of us here that are available as a resource to you to ensure the success of your SMP. So Nicole Seltzer, she is our Colorado River Basin Director from River Network. Myself, I'm Michaela Mullins with River Network, and I'm the Science and Policy Program Associate. Stacy Bowe with Strategic by Nature, Kim Lenberg with Alba Watershed Consulting, and Chris Stern with the Colorado Water Conservation Board. So again, we're all here to make sure that your stream management plan is successful. And we'll be hearing from all of the team members today in our presentation. Okay, Stacy, I'm gonna go ahead and hand it over to you.
My name is Stacy, and I'm going to talk to you today about what a stream management plan is and a little bit more about how stream management plans have been progressing throughout the state of Colorado. So stream management plans, or SMPs, are voluntary assessments of flow and other physical conditions that culminate in management actions or project recommendations. Stream management plans benefit and engage all types of water users, from agricultural, municipal, and industrial to environmental and rec. Stream management plans came about in 2015 with the Colorado Water Plan goal of 80% of prioritized reaches having an SMP by 2030. The intention of this goal was for each basin to prioritize the stream reaches that should be assessed for conditions and solutions, and for basins to identify and begin to close the environmental and recreational water gap, and to have local groups lead the way with guidance and support from the state. Along with the goal came increased funding for watershed restoration program grants to help communities pay for river health planning and implementation. You'll also hear the term integrated water management plan, which consists of a broader set of water interests than the traditional stream management planning definition that does focus on environment and recreation. Deciding which route to go is an individual and local decision. As you can see on the slide, grant guidance specifies that stream management plans will involve stakeholders to identify environmental and recreational values and objectives that are locally important, assess existing biological, hydrological, and geomorphological conditions at a reach scale, identify flows and other physical conditions or projects, and prioritize alternative management actions or projects to achieve measurable progress toward maintaining or improving flow regimes and other physical conditions. IWMPs expand on these objectives in order to bring additional water users and benefits to the table, such as agricultural and municipal and industrial. Stream management plans are voluntary, stakeholder-driven assessments, and each one is unique. Fact sheets for each one are available online at coloradosmp.org that Michaela will go over later on in the presentation. So SMPs also vary by size. Some have done prioritization phased assessments of the entire basin, and others have focused on one reach or a tributary. The leadership of stream management plans can also vary from local governments, non-governmental organizations and nonprofits, conservation districts, or teams of people. Importantly, leadership is affirmed by local stakeholders. So far, since 2016, when this all started, there have been 26 SMPs that have been completed or are in progress, with a few more coming online every year. We're starting to see some implementation projects, but it's too early to really say the impact that these have had so far. Since 2016, we've had $8 million invested into SMP processes. This investment in river health assessments would likely have not happened without the stream management plan goals in the water plan. River Network has spent some time gathering data on all of these 26 SMPs to understand their lessons learned and also capture the impact that they've had. At the time of gathering the data in March, we had 11 plans that had been completed and have produced 269 project recommendations, most of which are multi-benefit projects, emphasizing that stream management plans benefit all water users, both consumptive and non-consumptive. The recommendations fit into 24 different categories. Examples of benefits include coordinating management of water releases from an upstream reservoir to increase flows through a dry reach of river, reconstructing a diversion to allow fish passage and ease maintenance burden for the diversion owner, and stabilizing banks and channel restoration to improve fish habitat and raise water to allow irrigation diversion to function. There are technical data and information benefits in conducting these plans, as well as people benefits such as trust building and collective problem solving. Communities are coming together to work on these shared problems on the river and come up with shared solutions. You'll hear directly from a few SMPs today about the unique aspects of their processes and the benefits that they've realized so far. I'm excited to share with you the San Miguel Stream Management Plan. I work on that plan as a facilitator and helping with stakeholder engagement. And it's really incredible to see what that group has accomplished over 5 years. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Stacy, for that history of stream management plans. It's great information to have. So next we're gonna watch a short video from some folks down in the southwest part of the state who are working on the San Miguel Stream Management Plan and just learn a little bit more about their approach for their SMP.
Hi, I'm here today with Kenny Heldman and Celine Hawkins with the San Miguel Stream Management Plan, and they're going to talk a little bit about their process and experience to date.
I'm Kenny Heldman. I got involved with the Southwest Roundtable. I'm on the Farmers Water Board and the CC Board, both Norwood and Nuclear.
And I'm Celine Hawkins. I'm a program director with the Nature Conservancy. I'm a longtime roundtable member, and I'm the Colorado Water Conservation Board representative for this basin. So this was the pilot stream management planning process for the Southwest Basin Roundtable. So it was started quite a number of years ago. The stakeholder process that Kenny and I lead really came out of a meeting in 2017 when we rolled out the first draft of the needs assessment and got some input from Kenny and some of his colleagues about some problems in the process. So Kenny?
Yeah, we found that agricultural had been pretty much left out of the original needs assessment and felt slighted. So I went to the round table and showed concern. Of course, that got me put on the round table. And then the next step was getting co-chair with Celine to try to continue on and carry this through.
It's the entire San Miguel River from the headwaters to the confluence of the Dolores River. Kenny and I don't have an exact river mileage, but we think it's about 80 river miles.
If you could talk next about why stakeholder engagement's been so important to your process.
Yeah, well, Kenny told the story of how he got roped into co-leading the process, but it's pretty important that that could have been a time where we needed to take a step back from the planning process altogether, but that's not actually what the agricultural water users came to us with. They just wanted a better process.
Yeah, we needed to be included in the process to be reassured of what was going on with the river and build some confidence with what was happening with the process. So,
and now I feel like we're in a place that we have really great stakeholder engagement, and it's been a much richer discussion about opportunities for this river.
What's made your stakeholder process so unique?
Okay, well, I guess I start that. What's unique, I think, is how we've brought the east end of the county and the west end of the county together in a common conversation, and I think there's been a lot of respect for each side grown out of that conversation. So that's been great for me.
Great. Celine?
Yeah, and we just had really consistent participation from a really wide array of stakeholders, and we've had county commissioners driving up and down to come to meetings, so it's just been a really robust process with a lot of participation.
And what would you say the benefits of this diverse participation has been for your stream management process?
I've learned a ton about places in the watershed where I haven't worked before, and we just have gotten that sort of firsthand experience from everybody from, you know, outfitters that are working on the river to people who are running ranching and hunting operations, and so it's just, I've learned a ton through that process.
Yeah, I'll ditto off that. The learning process has been immense. It's just how this all works together from top to bottom. It's just, I've really grown through this whole process. I kind of got thrown into it by the round table, but yeah, it's been fantastic.
Awesome. Okay, so next up we've got Nicole Seltzer and Chris Sturm are going to dive us into the nuts and bolts of stream management plans. Nicole, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Michaela. Good morning, everybody. Nicole Seltzer with River Network. I'm going to spend about 10 minutes going through kind of some of the first steps in the stream management plan process, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chris Sturm with the Colorado Water Conservation Board to talk about some of the more meaty technical aspects. So one of the high level things that I wanted to mention before we kind of walk through the steps in the process is that this diagram is off of coloradosmp.org, and for each step in the process on the website, there are case studies and examples and ideas for different approaches and resources to take a look at. And so I would definitely encourage you to sort of get into the getting started section if you're interested in starting a stream management plan. There's a list of pre-planning questions that you can access from in there that sort of walks you through some of the things you should be asking yourself. And Kim, maybe you could put the link in the chat for that document. That would be great. So in general, stream management plans take anywhere from about 18 months to about 3 years. Those are the timeframes that people are generally working on. And what sort of drives that schedule, in my opinion, is sort of how large of a section you are tackling. Are you tackling just a small section that's only 8 or 9 miles of river, in which case it may only take 18 months and you only need one field season? Or are you tackling a couple hundred miles of river, in which case you're going to need more time because you have more stakeholders involved? And so it's a multi-year planning process that you enter into. In general, the cost of these have been anywhere from $150,000 up to over $500,000. And again, it depends on scale, and it depends on how much field work you need to do. It depends on the capacity of local organizations to conduct the task versus hiring consultants. Having $150 an hour consultants out doing riparian surveys gets expensive really fast. But if you're able to train volunteers in the basin in a standard methodology, you can do it for a lot less money. So there really are a lot of different ways that you can tackle them, and depending upon the budget that's available to you, it's pretty flexible. And the last thing that I'll say before we get into the sort of steps in the process is that phasing is your friend. You can apply for stream management plan funds from CWCB to get started, and you can your initial grant can really be sort of a phase 1 grant where you spend the time putting your stakeholder group together, exploring the goals, understanding stakeholder expectations and challenges, gathering all of the existing data that is out there. Those are all steps in the planning process, and you can apply for grants that sort of just get you to a point where you are organized and you understand what you need to do next in the assessment phase. So phasing is your friend if you're feeling like these processes are maybe a little bit hard to tackle. You can write a smaller grant up front. So Michaela, if you could hit the next slide. There you go. So in terms of getting started, there are a couple questions that you want to ask yourself. The first one is sort of who is leading what elements of the process? It's a really important decision to think about who is going to have what role and who's really sort of quote unquote in charge of the process. The capacity and the desire to lead these processes should not be overlooked. It really is a large commitment of energy and effort. Oftentimes you'll feel like you're banging your head against the wall because they're hard. So you want to have somebody in charge that has both the capacity and the interest and the time to spend to do it. Sometimes an existing organization can lead. Other times you may need a collective. Many of the existing organizations that run stream management plans, they can be conservation districts, they can be water districts, they can be nonprofits, they can be local government. There's examples of all different kinds of organizations that lead it. And then there's also places where it's a collective and you've got several organizations that are working together and they have sort of clear roles and responsibilities in the process. And there isn't necessarily one organization that's leading the whole thing. So thinking about the structure that you want to have and who needs to be in what roles is a really important part on the front end. Next slide, Michaela. The second piece to think about is geographic scale. Stream management plans can be done at a number of different scales, but the assessments that are done within them, so the understanding of existing conditions, so flow and fishery quality and riparian health, those are done at a reach scale. So you can certainly integrate landscape scale or site-specific scale work into your stream management plan if you want, but sort of understand that the process itself is really best tackled at a reach scale. And a reach can be, anything from, well, a reach is not, it's maybe, less than a mile of river. Generally, 1 mile to 3 miles would be a reach of river. You can have multiple reaches that you're looking at in the assessments. And I think Chris will probably talk a little bit about that. But you can definitely start at a watershed scale to landscape scale and then start to sort of narrow down into priority reaches, which is what we're doing up in the Yampa Basin, for example. And so one of the key decisions that you will make on the front end is, what are the segments of river that we really want to focus on? And the bigger the segment that you tackle, the longer and more expensive generally the process is going to take. So you may think about trying to tackle something that's a little more reasonable so that you can sort of test a methodology for your basin, for example, if there hasn't been a stream management plan yet. Next slide, Michaela. And then hit it one more time. There you go. So once you kind of have an understanding of who is interested in working on these and what the what the segment of river is you want to work on, there's a goal setting process that you go through with your stakeholders. And this is where the stream management plans start to get unique flavors depending upon where you are, because the community is really in charge of deciding what the goals of a stream management plan are. There are some pretty common goals that you'll see come up kind of again and again within stream management plans, such as establishing environmental flows, restoring a fishery, supporting infrastructure upgrades for irrigation, riparian corridor restoration. You know, there's some common things that you will see many stream management plans tackle, but the goal setting process is really driven by the community. And this is where you can make some decisions about, do I want a stream management plan? Do we want an integrated water management plan that gets into consumptive uses? And so there's sort of a whole process that you go through in order to really understand what your goals are. And then at the same time, next slide, Michaela, you want to be thinking about stakeholder engagement. And so depending upon the scale that you're working at and the goals that you've set for your process, one of the first questions that you ask yourself is who should be involved, how should they be involved, and why? There are likely going to be different levels of involvement. So you'll typically have a leadership team that's going to meet regularly. They'll provide oversight to the tasks. This may be the folks that are providing matching, cash funding, for example. And then you'll have a second group of folks, which are your key stakeholders. Those might be individuals or organizations that own or manage some of the resources that are involved in the assessment or some of the solutions to some of the challenges you want to tackle. So that could be, land management agencies like BLM or the Forest Service, or it could be the individual landowners or the water rights holders in the basin. I mean, it just kind of depends on the goals that you set for yourselves. But those key stakeholders tend to be the people who they're going to want to review work products. They're going to inform your goals. You probably want to give them regular, at least quarterly updates on the process so that they're, highly involved in sort of tracking where you're headed. And if there's things that go sideways, you can identify those earlier. And then lastly, the broader community, people who are interested, you might ask them to help you identify problem areas or come up with some opportunity brainstorming. These are key constituencies like recreation outfitters, private landowners in the basin, the fishery community, CPW. These are entities who may not want to take a really active role in your process, but you want to make sure you keep them in the loop to avoid surprises. So the last thing I'll say about stakeholder engagement is that it is hard and it takes a lot more time than you probably are going to anticipate. So it is important to build in enough time and budget into your processes to support robust stakeholder engagement. It does have the potential to throw off forward momentum in your processes if you don't dedicate resources to it. So I believe with that, we're going to move on over to Chris and talk through some of the assessment and objective setting processes.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Want to start off by thanking Nicole and Michaela for inviting me to be a part of this today. And then also thanking Stacy and Kim for supporting this work and putting all their hard efforts towards it. We've come a long way with stream management planning, and I'm really impressed with what's happened over the last 5 years. Just to back up a little bit before we talk about what's analyzed, stream management planning isn't the only type of planning that's funded through the CWCB's watershed program. There really is a whole family of different types of plans that fit under the umbrella of what I would call watershed health planning. Stream management planning is probably the most spirited child in this realm of planning, and that's because it essentially, at some level, has to look at flow needs for the objectives that are identified. And that's what made it unique and stand out in the 2015 water plan. The assessment level stuff, what is analyzed, is not unique to stream management planning. This is something that we do in all sorts of different watershed planning, like an EPA 9 elements plan, or oftentimes we'll see grant applications just for assessment and prioritization. Let's assess our watershed and prioritize projects to improve watershed health. This could also be something that we do in a forest health type plan to look at protecting water supplies in a post-fire, pre-flood type scenario. And we're starting to see more of those types of plans. So the reason I bring all those up is because we do have things that we look at and assess in all those different planning types, and those that are able to bring some continuity between the different types of plans or bring them together in one big planning effort are really going to be our high achievers as we move forward. But for stream management planning and these other plans, we define some of the thou shouts of what we'll be looking at, what we assess, and that's hydrology and geomorphology and biology or ecology, depending on who's doing the work for you in that last one. And really, the vision was to have the objectives in mind for the plan before we jump into the assessment. And that can help guide the assessment a little bit easier, but that's not necessarily how it shook out. Lots of folks need to assess the watershed first to identify what their objectives might be. They might have some different ideas about what those are in advance, but the assessments really help. So first we look at hydrology. This is like I said, not unique. We look at hydrology for lots of different planning efforts. We look at that when we're just planning on how to mitigate flood flows, for example. But in hydrology, we have flow regimes, and understanding that is going to be very important. And a natural hydrograph will look at the magnitude, the duration of flows, the frequency of flows, the timing of those flows, when do they occur, and the rate of change. You know, how fast do we go from high flows to low flows? And so understanding that throughout our stream reach that we're going to be studying is incredibly important. And then oftentimes we have to think about our managed flows as well. You know, most streams are gaining streams as you go downstream. There's more water in it. That's not necessarily true in Colorado. We can go from dry reaches to gaining reaches depending on how water is managed in our basin. And so having an understanding of that in our assessment is going to be vital when we're doing our stream management planning. Some other thoughts on hydrology are that we have a tendency to just look at that lower flows as we're looking at stream management planning. And I think this is a really good opportunity to look at our whole suite of flows throughout the hydrograph, especially as we look to marry our stream management plans with forest health plans, where we are doing planning for post-fire and pre-flood scenarios. Then we're looking at very high flows in many cases, and how can our watershed deal with or attenuate those types of flows. So it's an opportunity to really, as you're doing a hydrological assessment, to truly understand the hydrology of your whole basin and possibly make some decisions or some assumptions and decisions about how flows could change given disturbances in the watershed, like fire. And I'll take that one step further in saying that hydrological assessment could include scenarios that don't exist. Could look at lower flow scenarios than we have, or higher flow scenarios. In the example of fires, we could make some assumptions about burn severity and look at different higher flow scenarios. So let's jump into geomorphic assessments. We look at the geomorphology of a stream to understand its shape, its form. Rivers are influenced by the inputs from the watershed, like water, that we talked about through hydrology, and sediment, as well as organic material. And they're also influenced by their valley characteristics. and that has to do with its pattern and profile and dimensions. And so understanding the geomorphology of the stream is very important when we're looking at flow needs, because oftentimes we don't have a desired condition for our geomorphology. Our streams are responding to different disturbance scenarios, and may need some restoration or protection in conjunction with other elements to improve channel function. I won't get into the nuts and bolts of different methodologies. I will say that the CWCB is not prescriptive in methodologies for geomorphic assessments. The reason being is those are going to vary depending on the scope and scale of the stream management plan effort. And Nicole got into that a little bit with the graphic at different scales. There are compelling reasons to use different methodologies based on how large of a geographic area we're looking at and based on how quickly we want to achieve our objectives. But at its root, there's a lot of common variables that need to be looked at. And as I look at different methodologies, I see these variables that we're looking at reoccur across them. But when we're looking at geomorphology, it's trying to identify some kind of reference condition for our channel form. And finding that in the watershed can sometimes be difficult. If we do find it, we could call those conservation reaches or reaches that we want to protect. We may find reaches that are incredibly strategic in that if there are disturbances in those reaches, it's likely to have impacts on other areas, other reaches outside of that area. So not all of our reaches are the same. Some of them are incredibly strategic, or we could call them highly sensitive, and an assessment would lead us to identifying those. There's other reaches that may have disturbances, but have what could be called a high recovery potential, meaning that there could be a no action alternative there, and that they are working towards a channel evolution process that is going to lead towards recovery. And then we find a lot of degraded sites or degraded reaches in our geomorphic assessments. And I think that we've all seen degraded areas of our streams that we may want to prioritize for restoration. And when we look at making changes or restoration actions within our channel, and then possibly some flow solutions as well, then we're really making the best use of the limited amount of water that is available. We also look at a biological assessment. This is where I think it's, or ecological assessment. I think it's incredibly helpful to know our objectives here if we're interested in overall channel health versus just supporting a fishery. We may be looking at things a little bit differently. If fishing is our #1 objective and supporting a cold water fishery, for example, the assessment may lead us towards actually jumping in and doing some survey work. And that could lead to an R2 cross or something, a methodology of that level where we look at representative reaches where we actually want to get that granular data so that we understand what the actual flow needs are. I'm going to back up a little bit here, and when I talk about identifying flow needs, this is something that's not unique to water uses in Colorado. It is new for Environment and Rec, relatively new. We've had in many areas of the state over 100, 150 years to understand our needs for agricultural uses, for example. Flood irrigating corn, we have a good idea of what we need per acre foot, per acre, acre feet per acre. With Environment and Rec, I've seen some confusion. Do we have to nail a number? What is that exact number? I'd be really happy with a range, a flow range, knowing that we haven't had a whole lot of time to look at these needs. And so coming up with a range can be pretty helpful in that instance. And then as we're doing our assessments, I'd also say, I used to tell folks that implementing a project during your stream management plan can be very helpful. It helps us learn by doing things. It keeps our stakeholders engaged, which can be incredibly difficult. I haven't seen a whole lot of success with that, kind of some hesitancy to jump in, not knowing fully what we're going to do. So as I've been thinking about new ways to engage stakeholders, I've been thinking that during the assessment phase, or as we're trying to define our assessment methodology, this might be a really good time to get our stakeholders out in the field and practice the assessment on a representative reach. And this could be a unique opportunity to pair this with a visit to one of our partners, possibly in agriculture, do a landowner visit with a willing partner, do an assessment on that property. Oftentimes that could be beneficial if we're having some problems with erosion or deposition on that property, but it can also be an opportunity for our stakeholders to understand the operations at that rancher's property or farmer's property. So it's a really good opportunity for stakeholders to get together and not only understand the science behind the assessment process, but also to get comfortable with the different uses of water in the watershed and why that's important. I see here that I may be at time, so I'll stop there and we'll move on to the next step. Okay, Nicole, am I still going here?
Well, Chris, I think we had a series of slides for you to walk through some of the co-shaft stuff, but we are, I think, Michaela, give me a time check. I think that we're actually at time for this section and that we need to move on. Okay, sorry I missed those slides, but we're just going to look at different methodologies, including the co-shaft, which is Colorado Stream Health Assessment Framework, which really is a framework, not a methodology. And then just real briefly, Nicole, I'll say that I wanted to highlight the Rio Grande as well. They used a different methodology, which was derivative of the River Styles program. It is worth looking at different assessment types, but truly identifying the variables is most important. And finally, I'll leave it with the Rio Grande. For some reason, was the quickest one from assessment to prioritization to implementation. So there was something unique that happened there, but they are actively implementing projects in a very short time after completing their plan. And I highlight that because if you want to keep your stakeholders interested, you've got to show them action.
Ryan and I worked on behalf of the Mount Sopris, Book Cliff, and Southside Conservation Districts on the consumptive use portion of the Middle Colorado Integrated Water Management Planning.
I'm Paula Stepp. I'm the Executive Director of the Middle Colorado Watershed Council. Lori Rink, our Program Coordinator and previous Executive Director, took the leadership for the IWMP planning process for the non-consumptive uses of the Integrated Water Management Plan. We came together to achieve water security for the Middle Colorado River. We needed an integrated stream management plan that was locally driven as a problem-solving process. The people engaged were water users, water right holders, community members, state and federal resource agencies, and any vested stakeholder who wanted to work together to define waters and its needs here in our watershed, including all the constraints and issues that we all dealt with. Next slide. Our mission statement reflects some of our key concerns as we walked into this project. We have a projected population growth from just over 60,000 now to 80,000 in 10 years and 100,000 in 30 years. We're seeing increased aridification. Our Colorado River has interstate agreements that we have to meet. We have agricultural water shortages and aging infrastructure. We have impaired waterways. with habitat and flow limitations. There's an increased recreation demand, and our public lands are being hit by things like beetle kill, forest fires, road fragmentation, and other things that impact our forest and rangeland health.
So the coordination of our planning effort was a little bit different than some others, where we have the Book Cliff, Mount Cypress, and Southside Conservation Districts working on the consumptive use, needs, and risk analysis, as well as doing an infrastructure inventory and assessment, while the Middle Colorado Watershed Council mainly focused on the environmental and the recreational use needs and risk analysis. So each group had their own funding sources, which were provided either through the roundtable process or the Colorado Water Plan. We had an umbrella advisory group which oversaw and guided the planning effort and allowed us to combine our efforts to identify a collective set of projects and strategies for meeting our current and future water needs. The plan needed to be integrated so that we could represent the needs of all stakeholders in our watershed region. So it highlights the importance of all of those water users, which is something that the Basin Roundtable puts an emphasis on. It encourages communication and cooperation where we can learn from each other, discuss our collective interests, our future risks, and create personal connections with each other. It also allows us to form partnerships, identify multi-benefit projects, and work on a larger scale, which has larger impact and heightens the degree of implementation success for some of these projects that were identified.
We ended up with 55 specific actions that cover all of the consumptive and non-consumptive use concerns that we had during our many discussions. I think there were 25 meetings over 2.5 years with a number of stakeholders. The project goals that we had for these 55 actions included protecting existing water users and securing future water supplies, maintaining and enhancing a healthy watershed, promoting and preserving and protecting agriculture, and increasing resiliency in regional water. Our project started during the planning process where we had a fish barrier and a fish passage project going on, as well as a river access map. In 2021, we've already begun with fire restoration efforts due to the 2 fires that burned in the watershed in 2020. And we have 9 other projects that received state funding from the Colorado Water Conservation Board that we've initiated this year to work on these 55 specific action plans.
And just one example action that came out of our planning process is to coordinate agricultural infrastructure upgrade designs to include aquatic habitat and fish passage. This is one of those multi-benefit solutions, which is implemented on tributaries to the Colorado River, allows fish to get up beyond those diversion structures into the tributaries for spawning and refuge habitat. The structures were identified mainly by their proximity to the Colorado River and where they would have the highest impact to get those fish up and into the tributaries. And this action seeks to encourage alternative designs to agricultural diversion structures, which allows for fish passage, which benefits not only the agricultural user, but also the fishery on that stream. And the photo here is just an example of the Ware and Hines fish passage structure on Elk Creek here locally in our watershed. And with that, we're going to provide just some contact information for the consumptive and non-consumptive groups, as well as a link to our IWMP action plan. Thank you.
Any questions?
Great. Thanks, Michaela, for playing that video from Middle Colorado. And I know we have some folks on the call from there. So thank you so much for putting that together for us. And thank you, Chris and Nicole, for your overview. And we appreciate everyone's patience through our transitions. Next, we have the South Boulder Creek Stream Management Plan. Put together another video to give you a sense of what they're working on.
Hello, this is Stephen Brandt with Boulder Flycasters of Trout Unlimited, and I'm the project coordinator for the Lower South Boulder Creek Stream Management Plan. The combination of Trout Unlimited identifying South Boulder Creek as an important watershed improvement opportunity and the Gross Reservoir expansion permitting process coming to near completion led Trout Unlimited to believe that the requirements of that permitting, most specifically an environmental pool IGA, was going to require significant effort across a number of different entities, and we saw this as an opportunity to build a coalition. The study reach is an approximately 9-mile stretch of lower South Boulder Creek. Although it is relatively short, it's a very complicated and heavily used stretch of water. Most particularly, we have a lot of structures that segment the creek. We have no to low flows in the winter, and we have a number of different species that have to be taken into account. Also wanted to show you the group of partners and stakeholders we felt it was important to assemble right from the beginning in order to have a successful project. We did not start our effort with the SMP in mind. In fact, we knew very little about the SMP process. Instead, we focused on trying to build a watershed coalition, starting with the signatories to the IGA for the environmental pool. And then on top of that, started to review existing data that was available, inventory structures, walk the creek. And it wasn't for until about 18 months later that we felt we had built enough of a coalition that we could consider something like the SMP process, and that's the direction we finally went forward to in late 2019. We broke the project up into 2 phases, with phase 1 focusing primarily on planning and initial assessment activities. You can see by the funding, it was primarily funded from the Colorado Water Plan with a heavy in-kind services component for part of our matching funds. Trout Unlimited took on several of the important project leadership roles. We created and circulated an RFP and ended up selecting a prime contractor and associate subcontractors in order to cover the professional expertise requirements of this project. We completed the phase 1 project on time and under budget and delivered our final reports in June of 2020. During phase 1, we were able to organize and expand our stakeholder group and developed a robust communication plan across multiple levels of stakeholders. We selected methodology. We collected and compiled an extensive data library. We did an analysis on all 21 of the channel spanning structures to ensure we had an understanding going in for scoping of our field work in phase 2. And we were able to do flow analysis by taking some selective R2 cross samples and comparing those to existing flow targets. In phase 2, we transitioned from largely a planning exercise to the in-the-field assessments. We focused primarily on executing the communication plan from phase 1, closing data gaps identified in phase 1, and performing the river health assessment work in the field. We also decided to spin out the preliminary engineering design as a separate project. This was not only to apply for different kinds of grant monies and spread that around, but also to this gave us an opportunity to move forward an important improvement project more quickly. Phase 2 funding was much different and more cash intensive as we required more in the field expertise from our consultants. We were able to maintain our Trout Unlimited team and in its roles, and also the core of the consulting team. We also added a point flow modeling specialty group. You can also see here the spin-out project funding as a point of reference and also magnitude of scale of this kind of project. The fieldwork for phase 2 is complete, and our communications plan is not only in process but ongoing. And we will continue to have touch points with a number of different stakeholders through this entire phase. We're building out our database of watershed information, which we hope to use not only for the analysis in this phase, but for future projects and perhaps ongoing operational purposes. Remaining is really our analysis, identify high-value next phase projects, and issue our final reports. Lessons learned are numerous, and we could spend a lot of time going over these, but just in summary, data, hard to find, hard to use, get on it quickly. Make sure you have enough contingency for budget and timeline. All kinds of unanticipated things occur. That 18-month ramp up for us helped build the trust and establish the foundation for all of the project going forward. Communication with landowners and infrastructure owners is time consuming. We underestimated the total timeline for that. And we did run into the need for some legal help, which we never anticipated. Thank you very much for your time, for your attention. Hopefully there were some things here that will help you be more successful with your stream management plan. And please do not hesitate to reach out to our project team with any questions, comments, or requests.
All right, great. Thank you so much to all of our wonderful presenters today. Just to go over some of the resources that are available to you as you embark on your stream management plan. Probably the biggest resource is our website, coloradosmp.org. We don't have time today to go and take a look at the website together, so I'll just go over what you'll find here. We have a whole section on SMP 101, which is what we touched on today, but you'll find so much more information than what we were able to get at in our presentations today. You'll also be able to go and visit existing stream management plans. We've got a great map there so you can see where stream management plans are throughout the state. You'll also be able to learn more about each of their approaches, their funding, who their stakeholders are, and more. Our SMP nuts and bolts, this is what Nicole and Chris touched on. They'll be able to go here and just really dive into those nuts and bolts. It's a wealth of information in this section of the website, so take some time to poke around there. We also have a whole page dedicated to stream management plans in agriculture. We felt like this was important because agriculture needs to be at the table for all of our stream management plans. They're such a key stakeholder. So on this page, you'll learn about the benefits for agriculture to be involved in these types of plans and related projects. Then on our community and learning page, you'll find past recordings from our peer learning network workshops, peer calls. We also have a video series, our Ask a Practitioner videos, where Stacy goes and interviews different practitioners on some sort of technical subject. So this is, like I said, just a really great resource. There's a wealth of information here. We do regularly update this, so highly recommend taking a look at this website. Okay, so funding, I'm sure you all know, but the Colorado Water Conservation Board Watershed Restoration Grants are coming up. They're typically due the first Thursday of November. And then also on our website, like I mentioned, you'll be able to see some of the other sources for funding for your stream management plans. I briefly mentioned our peer learning network. This is a network for all of the leads on these types of plans, and we come together throughout the year through peer calls, and we do workshops and some field trips as well. We also have an online community for all of our SMP leads, so you can go and ask questions and share resources through that online community. And I also wanted to mention that River Network is certainly not the only one providing support. So some of the other organizations that you can reach out to might include your local Trout Unlimited chapter, the Nature Conservancy, Audubon Society, and your local conservation district. So there's lots of organizations available to you to ensure the success of your stream management plan. All right. Thank you all so much. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to Nicole or myself. Our emails are here on the page for you. And we're going to dive into some Q&As. Thank you all again.